Hello, this is episode 39 of Keep Blooming. I'm your host, Liz Montigny. Today's episode is for you if you're wondering if this life coaching thing actually will work for you, or for the woman in healthcare field or any fast-paced vocation. We have Nichole Haugen on the show, and she is a wife, mom to 6 girls, nurse, and a life coach for Catholic women who are in healthcare. Nichole has a great way to check in with yourself when you are really in the heat of the moment and you need a quick reset. And we talk about what well really means for you. Hint, it's not the same as for your friend. So let's get growing and keep blooming. Tired of overthinking your next step? Do you want simple steps to level up your mind, body, and spirit? Or maybe you need some inspiration to reach your goal? Then you've tuned into the right podcast. This is Keep Blooming, and I'm your host, Liz Montigny. Each week, I'll encourage you to drop the hustle mentality for hope and act on the dreams God has put on your heart. Like you, I'm doing all the things as a Catholic, a wife, a mom to 3 boys, and a licensed Ziegler coach. So let's get growing and keep blooming. Welcome to today's episode of Keep Blooming. I'm so excited to welcome Nichole Haugen to the podcast. And Nichole is a wife and a mom to 6 girls. Wow, I grew up with 5 brothers, so I can't wait to hear about how 6 girls is going. She's a nurse and a life coach for Catholic women who work in healthcare. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Nichole. Nichole, what else do we need to know about you?
Yeah, I've been a nurse for 13 years and mostly worked in hospice field. Just taking a step back from the physical nursing field for a couple of years and focusing on life coaching and helping other women like me. And like I said, raising 6 girls and being married and all the things.
Yes, all the things is right. Well, we're going to get into all that. But before we do, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know I like to open and close our conversations with scripture. And we're going to do that with one of Nichole's favorite passages, which is Matthew 6:34. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's troubles is enough for today. Yes, there is a lot going on there, isn't there, in that one line? So I just love this. It's about being in the present moment, right? And as Nichole said in her intro, she already has a lot going on, so she has to be in the present moment, right? So this is a powerful passage in so many ways. What else do you have to say about this, Nichole?
Yeah, just that I like how it brings me back to the present moment and then helps me rely on God and be like, oh yeah, I don't have to worry. Like he's got this.
Yes, we forget that. We have to surrender and trust, and that's not easy. I know it's not easy. So what does a Catholic nurse coach do?
Yeah, I coach women one-on-one for 12 weeks, 12-week sessions, once a week. And yeah, we basically talk about anything, but a lot that comes up is the work and home life balance. That's a big thing, especially in healthcare, that women struggle with, because you basically give your whole heart and soul to your patients. And then you come home and you're exhausted and burnt out and tired. And a lot of times you feel like you have nothing left to give.
You hear that in so many areas for women who work and have children, but I would expect that in the healthcare area, it's even more amplified because, like you said, you are giving everything, but mentally, physically, and spiritually. Like it's a whole body experience in healthcare, I would expect. So I'm sure there's a lot of work to do there. How did you even get into this?
Yes, I kind of stumbled across life coaching. I'd never heard of it before 2021, and initially joined like a group program to lose weight, and I did lose a lot of weight. And then I was like, wow, that worked. Like maybe I could be a better mom, and yell less, and maybe things would be better in my marriage. And So I had this group program and it was great. And my husband and I at the time were going through a lot of struggles. I've had found out he had been not being completely truthful of how money was being spent. There was credit cards that I didn't know of that were open. And so we were going through a lot of struggles, and life coaching really helped me. I leaned on it a lot. I was like, okay, what can I control?
Right.
How can I show up? How do I want to show up? There's a lot of time in there where I didn't know if I even wanted to stay married. And I just got life coaching through all that. And in 2019, before my husband and I started having issues and I realized all this stuff, both my parents had died actually, very close together. My dad had had cancer for 10 years. And so he passed away very, very, I wouldn't say peaceful. He was in a lot of pain, but the whole family was there. It was just beautiful. My mom died. It was very unexpected. It was winter after my dad had passed away. She missed her turn. We live in North Dakota, so it's always, bad roads, storming. She thought she was turning into her driveway. She missed the turn because it was covered with snow and accidentally drove out onto water. And it was just very traumatic. It took them a while to find her body and searching for her and all that. So going through a lot of grief, life changes, obviously, a lot of estate things, dealing with all that as my siblings and I went through that. And then this came out with my husband, and, I was just very searching. I was pretty angry at God for a while. Yeah. So again, life coaching just really helped me through all that. And I realized I had grown so much. My marriage had been saved from life coaching. And so I wanted to help other women as well.
Wow, that's super powerful. I mean, it sounds like you had every cross thrown at you at once, which sometimes it feels like that happens, right? I mean, you had trauma and grief and marriage struggles, and here you are. I mean, you were working that whole time.
Yes, I was working. We had just had our sixth child a couple of weeks before my dad passed away. So, that whole, every time you have a new baby, the whole change of everything. And so it was a lot at once, and then enter a pandemic. And that threw in, distance learning and all the craziness of that and uncertainty. And so it was a lot.
It is a lot. And I love how you took your struggles and what you went through and how you came out on the other side. And now you're using it to serve and help other women, which is so amazing. And I think that's almost a formula for finding your purpose is, hey, what have you overcome? Okay, maybe God is asking you to help other people do that. I think that's really incredible. So I'm curious, when you say life coaching helped you, in what ways? Were there certain tools, or was it just that you had an objective listener and accountability, all of the above? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say all of the above. So what it really did was, for one, it helped me just go to a neutral space where I could just lay it all out, right? I could cry. I could you would do that with friends and family, but they try not to pick sides, but typically we're human, so we pick a side. And so it was just a neutral space to go to. And then they would kind of poke holes in my story, right? Well, is that really true? No, you said he said this. What does that even mean? How did you interpret that? I always had a story of well, he doesn't love me with my husband, which I think then goes deeper to kind of a searching in my heart that had been there for a while of well, does God really love me? People in my life are dying and they're failing me. They're not showing up. I thought marriage was supposed to be like this, and it's not. Does God really love me? And so it really helped me to come around and be okay, well, what am I believing right now? What is the truth? And what do I want to choose to believe?
Yeah, I love your point about you always have a choice. And what is the truth? I think so many of us are trapped in, we have this lie, on a loop in our head. And I think we can all attest to that. And something I always share with my clients is what is that lie? Write it down and write the opposite of that and sit with that truth, because that's God, for as long as you can. What was your aha moment for, I'm going to turn this around. Was it just accepting God's love? How did you do that? I'm curious.
Well, I think there was a couple times where it was like, okay, like this is not going well. This is not how I want to keep showing up. One of the big ones was when we were cleaning out my parents' house. It had been my childhood. I mean, I always had lived there. It was my childhood home. And just going through that brought up so many things, and just, grief, anger, and then, happiness too. There's a lot of joy memories there as well, and trying to deal with that. And so at that time I had hired a one-on-one coach for my weight loss, because I was trying to focus on weight loss. And I was like, okay, with all this grief, I know I'm overeating. And that was very helpful. And then another breaking point came like in my marriage, where we were really finalizing closing out of the house. My husband and I were in probably the worst place we'd been in like 3 years with all of this. And I needed that support from him. And at the time, like he just couldn't give it to me in the way I wanted. And so again, there was more grief from that on top of grief of like, okay, we're closing out this chapter of my life, of my childhood. And so I hired another coach then to really help me through that and be like, okay, well, what is support? Like, what are you actually looking for? And then, I mean, through that, it really helped me realize like, oh yeah, like I always have the support of God. I always have the support of Mary and the saints and Jesus. And like, I'm not even going to them at all. Like I'm kind of sticking my head in the sand, and like, just like, nope, like, okay, I know they love me. If I just repeat that to myself enough, like, okay, like I'll believe it. But I didn't believe it. I couldn't feel it. I couldn't really come to grips with it. Like, I think, like you said, there's some lies that we tell ourselves. And the lie I've told myself for a long time was like, I'm not good enough. If people really knew me, they wouldn't love me. Like, and I think a lot of people have those, but we don't recognize them all the time. It's just such a ingrained story that we tell ourselves. So it really brought that out and really helped me deal with it head on.
Yeah. Because you working on weight loss, but then all these other things were happening. And I remember hearing a priest say he was running a healing service, and he said, we could heal you from, Jesus can heal you through cancer, from cancer right now through me, but that's not going to do you any good if you're walking around with a wounded heart. Mm-hmm. So I really like that idea that it's almost like God was calling you to go deeper than just the weight loss, because yeah, you could lose the weight, but then all those other things are still a problem. Mm-hmm. So I love that. It was a huge wake-up call. So I feel like there's grace and blessings in that, but it's so hard at the same time, especially when it's all happening at once. So something you said in your intro too, which is like, you're covering all the bases with everything that you do in life. And especially for women in healthcare, like you said, they have to serve so much inside work, inside their home. It's like give. So what is a common problem that you see with your clients, and how do you help them overcome that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems is that as wives, as moms, and then as a worker, right? Like we go to work, and if we get caught up at work, like if we feel on top at work, like, oh my gosh, like I had an awesome day, you come home and you see all the ways like you're failing at home. You're not caught up on dishes, laundry. You don't have the perfect Pinterest meal to put out on the table. And then when you get caught up at home, then you feel like you're not giving enough at work. And there's just always kind of that tug which then kind of leaves you like, again, I'm not good enough. Like, if I only tried harder, this person is doing, like, I would always compare myself a lot. I see other people compare themselves. Like, if I only did this like she did, then I would be able to do it all.
I see that so much myself with people that I work with, is just this comparison game. And I always like that phrase of, you can't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 20. And then somebody else added to that, and they're totally different books, So so I think that's really important. And I think especially in the culture that we're in, it's very easy to fall into the comparison trap. I've talked about this on the podcast in the past too, is just, first of all, be happy for those people. If they're excelling, or it seems like, they're doing great, you can know that that is for you too, just not yet, or you have to figure out a way, right? Be happy for them. I think that's another way to frame it. But when you do have clients talking about this, especially, and I like this point of everything's going great at home, but then it gets offset by work and vice versa. What are some ways that you can combat that?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell my clients, my favorite phrase is always nothing has gone wrong, like, and just that, what does that even mean to have everything going well? Like, is it a realistic expectation to always be on your A game all the time with every aspect of your life? Or is it more important to have a balance, a more consistent balance across the board, instead of having all these highs and lows all the time?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think you touched on something else too. Like, what's your definition of well? What's your definition of balance? Because what I think is quote unquote work-life balance is not the same as what you think or somebody else thinks. It's just not. So I think that's a really important point, to figure out what that definition is for you and your family. So I like that. What is well? Yeah, that's great. Do you have, for women who may be listening who are in healthcare, and even just the moms who are working, who are listening to this now, what are your top tips, or a couple takeaways that we can do right now, as soon as we're done listening to this podcast, that will help make a shift?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I try to do is always just take a deep breath. And then I like to ask myself, am I tired? Am I hungry? Because, just like in nursing, when a patient's in so much pain, you can't deal with their spiritual side, because pain just kind of blocks everything else out. And so I like to just kind of ask myself that, to just kind of ground myself, and then be like, okay, yeah, it's been, and especially as a nurse, a lot of times you don't always get a break all the time, oh my gosh, I have to go to the bathroom. I haven't eaten anything. I just need some water. Right. So take care of those basic needs. And then you can do that in the moment when there's kind of the situation has arrived where you just feel really stressed or panicked or overwhelmed, and you feel that tension in your body. And I like to also kind of just recognize that tension, where it's at, describe it, and then just be like, okay, I'm thinking right now that I'm so behind, right? I'm really stressed out right now. So okay. And sometimes in the moment, you can't do anything about it, right? Because you are at work, and you have the next patient to see, and then you do charting, but just to just sit with that, breathe with that, be like, okay, I'm just going to get some water. And then just, nothing has gone wrong, right? God will provide me with all the time that I need today. Everything that needs to get done will get done. And then, you can always go back and kind of look at in a situation okay, maybe instead of getting up in the morning, I stayed in bed and scrolled on Facebook. Okay, I'm going to work on that. There's always things that we tend to procrastinate with, especially when our brains are panic. We like to be oh no, let's just scroll on Facebook because that's safe. So Like, so just to kind of recognize some of those things that are happening, and then to also just recognize, like, maybe I don't have the whole story, right? We always tend to think that what our coworkers say to us or what our husband says to us is like a personal attack on us. And they have their own version in their head. They have their reasons of why they said that or did that. And just be like, okay. Then I like to try to like look at people with compassion and say, like, okay, like with my husband, for example, I'm always like, well, of course, like I can see he's like probably defensive right now because he feels triggered in a way that he feels personally attacked. And so to just recognize that and be like, okay, just calm down. Let's like feel those feelings until we can talk about it rationally.
You said so many great things in there. So what I like is just, first of all, you're talking about just address the basic need, right? Like it's almost that power of the pause, like you talked about. Again, I think we're programmed in this world, between the texts and the technology and the everything, that you have to respond immediately. And I can only assume that in healthcare, life and death, you have to respond. But when you're talking about what is going on with you, taking that moment to pause and just, how is my body doing? Like, have I eaten? How did I sleep? So I think that's so important. It's so easy for us to blow off the physical stuff, but we can't, because that's all part of who we are. And like you said, wow, that could be an easy fix. Go drink some water, and I also like what you said about, we can't control other people's feelings, reactions, anything. We can only be in control of our response to them. So like I say on the podcast a lot, do you want to react or do you want to respond? Respond is more controlled, and it's more, as you say, like, okay, you've assessed what's going on. Maybe you took a little inventory of your feeling, how they may be feeling. And it's more of a charitable approach, this isn't easy. None of this is easy, especially if this has been a cycle that's been going on for you for a while. So that's why I always like to talk about, just take it in little steps. Like you said, if you're waking up and the first thing you're doing is scrolling, okay, step one, why don't you work on not doing that, in little chunks over time, and then, tackle the next thing and the next thing. So tell me, Nichole, what is like a common myth or something that people like just assume about what you do, and how do you respond to that?
I think probably the biggest myth is that it won't work, or like it won't work for me. Mm-hmm. Right. And then we go through life, and typically there's pain points that come up, and we think, oh my gosh, like I should really do something. I should try to change. I should reach out for help. And then it kind of goes away. And so we don't reach out for help. And then it just keeps coming back. And each time, like I know, especially in my life, I know it's gotten a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger each time, until then I'm at the breaking point where I'm like, okay, like we're going to get divorced. Like this is going to be how life is now, like all the things. So just to seek help, and that it does work. Like it just opens your mind to, like I said, it just pokes holes in the story that you think these things are just truth, and they're not. You said, like, when you compare it to like, okay, well, how is managing my house well? How is keeping up with my work schedule well? Like, well, everybody has a different well definition. And like, okay, like a life coach just helps you question that. So you can know yourself what that even means, because we just use these broad and general terms to describe things.
I think that's so true. And I also think too, that in some ways, especially if people are really struggling, they might see what someone else is doing. Like you talked about that comparison game before, and try to just mirror that. But that's probably not what God wants for you, because that's not you, that's somebody else. Right. So I think it's really important that's where a coach comes in and can really help you figure out the best thing for you. So tell us, how can we follow you? What's coming up for you? And this will all be in the show notes too, but tell us a little bit more about all that.
Yeah, I host once a month. I have free webinars, and that's always posted on my website. So that's www.catholicnursecoach.com. That's where you can sign up to get a free discovery call with me and see the next upcoming webinar. And then I'm Catholic Nurse Coach on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Excellent. And like I said, that'll all be in the show notes. And Nichole, thank you again for being just so candid with your story. And I think it's so important for us to hear, people's journeys, because we find ourselves there, and to know that there is a way out, there is a path out, and it's all just comes down to a matter of choice. Having someone come alongside you and offer you that hope and point out those choices and maybe poke holes into things, like you said, is super valuable, can really just grow so much, not just, the mental, physical, your own body stuff and your own mind, but your relationships and your work, like you said. So beautiful. So let's go back to our Lectio with our conversation, which I just think is so perfect for all the things we just talked about. And that is Matthew 6:34. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've talked about that so much in what you shared in terms of, when you're having that fight or flight syndrome, moment, is just what's going on here right now. Let's deal with right now. And I even think it's a little bit of a wake up call too, to what you just said about if something keeps coming up, and then you get to the point where it has to be addressed, to just not ignore that. I love that. Anything else on that scripture passage, Nichole?
No, just I think it's just a great one to just kind of every once in a while pause and reflect on. And so I hope other women, moms, find it comforting to them as well.
And I also hear, that phrase that you've used, nothing has gone wrong, right? It's just, we're just dealing with the moment here. So what do we need to do at this time? So beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Nichole. And like I said to everyone, all of Nichole's information is in the show notes. So please go there. Let's get growing and keep blooming. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Keep Blooming. Tune in every Wednesday for a dose of hope and encouragement. To be the first to know about my upcoming retreats and latest offerings, become an email subscriber at lizmontignycoaching.com. Have a wonderful week, and remember to keep blooming.